Welcome to JS Podcast number 120. I'm Stephen Knight. How the hell are you? Good? Good. Very, very, very pleased to welcome friend of the podcast, Chris Matheson, back again. I think he's probably podcast royalty at this point. I think this might be the third time he's been on. It's always great fun, really funny, really smart. It's probably the easiest hour I have to record when Chris comes on the show. For those of you who don't know, Chris is an author. He's also one of the screenwriters on the Billings Head movies, which played a significant part of my childhood. I don't know about yours. So we will be talking about that, actually. There's some exciting news and some, I'd say, exclusive details, perhaps, about the potential Billings Head 3 movie that appears to be moving ahead now, which is exciting. But he'll be talking about his wonderful new book. It's called The Trouble with God, a divine comedy about judgment and misjudgment. He was on a while back talking about his first book, The Story of God, and it continues in that hilarious theme. He takes the character of God from the Old Testament in this new book, and he follows him right through to the New Testament, right through the Qur'an, through to Mormonism and Scientology, and it's hilarious. He writes from a perspective that gives you the inside scoop on what God's thinking, what he's making of all this, and it really hammers home the internal contradictions and just the absurdities of the Bible, and it's wonderful, and it's very, very, very funny, so definitely pick that up. I know it's on Amazon. You can find it if you type in Chris Matheson or The Story of God. You can find his first book there too, and this one's The Trouble with God, a divine comedy about judgment and misjudgment. So we'll be getting right into that, and he'll be spilling some details about the upcoming Billings Head sequel, so make sure you stay tuned in to the end of the podcast. You can keep up to date on this fine show at gspellchecker.com. Enjoy.
There's a word that some folks find real hard to spell. Ain't it horrible for you, except after saying, who cared to go burn in hell? But then along came a man, a spell check across the God of creed, and he set out upon a noble quest to help those who don't know what it means, and he said, go Atheist, and don't you put that I before that E. Atheist, don't mean we don't speak to double E. And he keeps telling them things he got to say. He'll raise the shoppers at night, we'll make them run away. But if it's not that fight, well, they can go all day. Spell checker, easy, got to spell check. Now you know how it goes, to sing along with me. Atheist,
It's a great pleasure to welcome author and screenwriter Chris Matheson back to the GS Podcast. Chris, how are you doing?
Good. Nice to be back.
Excellent. So I finished your latest book. It's titled The Trouble with God, a divine comedy about judgment and misjudgment. Loved it, by the way. Hilarious, as usual. A lot more ambitious than your previous efforts, but we're still on this issue of God. So I have to ask, what's your problem with God? Basically, you see, he seems like a good guy trying to do his best, and you will not give the man a break, as far as I can see.
I know, it seems mean-spirited, doesn't it? He's such a nice guy. He's always so kind and always so generous. I don't know. There's something just truculent and angry inside me that makes me go after him. I find him hilarious, and I just can't stop picking at him because he's such a bombastic fool, but we're always told he's perfect, and that's just such a good joke. I just can't stop being amused by that joke that he's supposed to be perfect, and he's the most imperfect character imaginable.
Yeah, fairly flawed, one might say, but for those who've not picked up your previous efforts, and they should remedy that immediately, if you could just give them an explanation of what the structure is and what it is you're intending to do. It's basically a retelling of the actual scriptures, isn't it? In a way that logically follows to a degree.
Yeah, my first book was called The Story of God, and it was telling his story using the Bible, quoting chapter and verse from Genesis to Revelation, tracking him, and not quite first person. We're not in his mind, but almost like you're on his shoulder. You're right there with him, trying to make sense of his bizarre, sometimes inexplicable, contradictory, violent, impulsive behavior. And I finished that book, and it was fun to write. It was about as much fun as I'd ever had writing. And I thought, I don't really want to be done with this character. I would like to keep writing him because I do find him very funny. And luckily, there's more books. So I thought, well, it's the same guy in the Qur'an, and it's the same guy in the Book of Mormon, and I'll just track him out of. So I went back and I revisited some of the stuff that I find especially funny in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then I follow him into those other books and try to make sense of what he's doing there. The basic, I guess, conceit of my books is it's all true. Every word is true. The Old Testament's true. The New Testament's true. The Qur'an's true. The Book of Mormon's true. They're all true. And what kind of insane character does he have to be in order for that to be the case? So that's kind of what I was doing. And then I wanted to put in one very recent book. So I added Dianetics at the very end, because I thought that it was, well, it struck me as funny. And Elron, yeah. And I thought God would, by this point, he would be looking for an explanation of why things never go the way he wants. Because I think it's very frustrating to him. He's omniscient, he's omnipotent, but he's often angry and often frustrated, which is hilarious. It makes no sense because he's got absolute power. And so I used Elron to kind of explain it to him, like, well, this is what's wrong with human beings that will explain why they don't behave the way God wants them to.
What I love about your book especially, and I think this is most prominent when you're in the sort of Old Testament realm, is you'll say something absolutely insane, and I'll think, that's not in the book, that's not in the Old Testament, and you'll quote the reference. I mean, I was at my desk on a break the other day, and I actually had to look up a bit of the Old Testament, because I thought, that's utter bullshit. And nope, there it was. I think it was the part about Jezebel and the being eaten and the feces. And I thought, how have I missed that all this time? And somebody who one of my colleagues was looking over my shoulder and asking me, why are you looking up Bible verses? You're an atheist. And I'm like, yeah, and this is the kind of shit which made me an atheist. So they couldn't believe half the stuff that's in it. So, you must have really had to study the scriptures quite a lot to get this accurate to the point where it's not embellished to a degree where someone could say you're taking huge liberties.
I did study them extensively. I would say I read them each 3 or 4 times, and very, very carefully. And I was looking for little details and looking for strange little revelatory moments that express something ridiculous. And usually the ones that amuse me are, some of them are just weird, but a lot of them, they're just mean. They're just spectacularly mean. Like, he's just the biggest asshole imaginable. You just can't quite get your head around what a colossal asshole this guy is. And I always find those super funny.
It's really funny because what becomes quite apparent in your telling of the stories is that it's just basically one sequence of an individual who's supposed to be perfect trying to undo his own mistakes.
Yeah, right. He blunders from beginning to end. It is kind of a comedy of errors. He rarely seems to get things right, and he's making massive overcorrections, which involve killing huge numbers of people again and again. When he gets frustrated, he'll wipe out hundreds of thousands of people in one fell swoop. and then his just stunning cruelty, like he's so punitive and he's so vindictive. And he seems to, at a certain point when I was writing it, I thought, this whole thing's about pain. It's all about pain. It's all about his pain. It's all this warped psychodrama. He's in a tremendous amount of pain. I mean, that's kind of evident. I find him laughable, but I would say that at a certain point in the writing of it, I thought, this is a tremendously sad and damaged character. He's like a kid who's never been touched. Somebody, I didn't come up with this, but somebody said to me, he's like a kid who's never felt a human touch and who's given an AK-47 or nuclear weapons. And that's kind of right. He's unbelievably damaged and warped and kind of sad and ostensibly perfect. And he's told he's perfect, and he seems to think he's perfect, but he knows he's not. And he wants to hurt mankind. He enjoys hurting mankind. It's built in. And mankind hurts him. We hurt him again and again and again by not loving him. And then humans seem actually to love Jesus more, which in my story really fries God. He doesn't like that. He wants all the love, and he sends his son down to just kind of spread the word about him. But Jesus mainly just wants to talk about himself, which is what Jesus talks about. He mainly just talks about himself. And that really bugs him too. That makes him mad that people like his son more than they like him. And that kind of becomes a theme of my book. And I think it's kind of a weird theme of all of these books, the role of the weird competitive relationship between God and his son, I think is pretty central to the whole thing.
I really love that whole idea you had, that the Qur'an was essentially God's way of dealing with this whole Jesus populism issue. It's kind of like a battle of jealousy. That's great. I mean, I really want to touch on that in more detail, but we're still on sort of the Old Testament, New Testament area. You spend a lot of time talking about angels and what they are and what they mean to God, and that's something that's quite conflicted within in theology anyway. I think my very first nativity book, the angel Gabriel, was a big, beautiful blonde woman. And what's your takeaway of what angels actually are and what their function is, having done a bit more extra research than the average individual?
Well, they don't make any sense right from the get-go, because why would an omnipotent God need assistance?
Stuff, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't. They don't make a lot of sense. They are there. By the end of all of these books, you kind of get the picture that they were there almost from the very beginning. It starts to seem that his very first action was to create some angels so they could observe what he's doing, because he wants to be seen. He wants to be observed. He wants acknowledgement. He wants an audience, basically. So he creates them so they can observe what he's doing. He gets by with a very small number of them for a pretty long time. I don't know the exact number. Maybe you do. 10, 12, not all that many. And then he creates a massive number of angels in the end, at the end of the story, to wipe out, to just lop human beings to bits. I think they're men. I don't see any reason to think they're women, because when given the choice between men or women, why would we ever think that he would create women? He hates them. Why, I mean, on what basis would anyone think that Gabriel was a woman? I don't see that. I don't see any evidence for that. I think they're men. I think it's hilarious. I think his usage of Gabriel to be kind of his wingman and go down and talk to Mary and tell her that God's going to come down and, basically have sex with her, really, is at least my interpretation of it, is unbelievably funny. He can't even do it himself. He can't even go down and say, "Hello, Mary. I'm God, the creator of the universe. I find you quite attractive, and I've chosen you." No, he sends Gabriel down to do it, which is really great, and Gabriel just puffs him up and talks about how great God is. I think they're, as you say, they're kind of They're kind of staff. They don't make any sense. I think there have been arguments historically about why would an all-powerful God need angels anyway? Why can't he just do everything himself? What is the logic of that? Of course, and then the angel question leads directly to Satan, of course, because Satan is, we're told eventually that Satan's an angel, although I don't know that that's not really in the Old that's not really in the Old Testament. I think that's more Milton, actually, who creates that story. To my knowledge, that's Milton. And it's a great story. It's great, and Paradise Lost is great. It doesn't really seem to be there. I guess you could infer that Satan is some kind of fallen angel, but that's a whole other can of worms. Satan, who is he? What is he? Why is he there? That's a whole other question.
Well, we touched on it briefly before, this idea that you play very strongly on in your book, that God actually hates Jesus, and you can kind of understand why when you lay it out the way you do. And at what point would you read in the text, did that occur to you that was a plausible narrative?
Jesus doesn't talk a whole lot about anything other than Jesus. He's his father's son in that respect. He's very self-involved. He doesn't talk very much about God. And it struck me at a certain point that Jesus is very prone to talking about how much God loves him. And there's a lot of references to how much God loves him. But I think there's one reference to how much he loves God. And to me, that would bother God. That's the kind of thing that would bother God. I think, in my view, he doesn't really approve of the way Jesus is going about his mission. He doesn't approve of the healing thing. He doesn't approve of, he thinks it's a very bad choice to bring Lazarus back from the dead, because that's meant to be an amazing, breathtaking thing when he comes back from the dead. So he's kind of just squandered it. It's like, well, all right, well, you blew that, dummy. That was supposed to be the big moment. And he doesn't like the way he walks around on water in the middle of the night, because, like, why are you doing it then? Why aren't you doing it in front of, like, 1,000 people? I gave you that ability. He just doesn't like the way he's doing his thing. The moment, of course, that brings it all to a head is Jesus's death, which is staggeringly mean, staggeringly ugly, and brutal. And given that God chose it, it's not just that Jesus came down and, I guess, sacrifices his life for some inexplicable reason. It doesn't make sense. In my view, what would make perfect sense? Okay, here's what would make perfect sense. Jesus should have lived to be 100 years old, and he should have traveled the world, obviously. Why would that not be the case? I mean, why would that not be the case? It's a complete no-brainer. He should live to be an old man, and he should spread the word all over. And he should travel to Asia. Yes. And he should travel north up into Europe. And he should travel he should travel to North America and South America if possible. He should travel the world and spread the word. And he should probably have children, because why would you not want that? Why would you not want the line? Why would God not want grandchildren, great-grandchildren, his line? I'm just going to send my son down, and at the age of 30, I'm going to have him brutally murdered. And in my view, that was kind of yet another impulsive move. Like, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of all the attention he's getting. This thing's about me. He's making it about him. His followers are going to be called Christians. I don't want them called Christians. I want them called Yahwehians or Lordians. So he kills him, and he kills him in a really mean way. I have him think to himself at one point, why didn't I just let him take poison like that prick Socrates? But he doesn't.
What was that? About Plato being too gay?
Yeah. He thinks Plato's just Plato's even too gay for him, and God's pretty gay. But Plato just pushes it too much. that death is just, man, I have God think to himself at one point, why did I give him the kind of death that I gave Jezebel, who I hated as much as anybody? And it seems kind of inexplicable. What is the answer for that? It's a very tortured relationship. And Satan, of course, plays a role there too, because Satan plays a role everywhere. Satan always pops up. He's a very important character, a very strange, enigmatic character. But his relationship with Jesus is very curious, very elliptical, and very suggestive.
Well, last time we spoke, we kind of brought up the possibility of you taking this same approach with the Qur'an, and you said you'd be up for that, and you sounded sincere, but I thought maybe you'd probably talk yourself out of it somewhere down the line. And I was very surprised to hear from you when you'd completed this book, just to say that was included in it. And I think we get there fairly soon. I think we get there about chapter 11. And we give the God of the Qur'an, which is the same God, the same treatment. And I was just wondering, for obvious reasons, how cautious were you about approaching this?
Well, I wanted to write the book, and I thought, if I'm going to keep following this character, and I don't follow him into the Qur'an, let's say I just jump to the Book of Mormon. Let's say I just skip the Qur'an, right, and just do the Book of Mormon. I'm going to feel like a colossal chicken shit for the rest of my life. I'm just going to feel like such a coward. If I'm going to write, I'm either not going to write this follow-up book. I'm just not going to do it because I'm going to go, too dangerous. Or I'm going to write it, and I'm going to give the same treatment to the Qur'an that I've given the other books. Not different treatment.
No.
I don't think it gets, I'm not taking harder whacks at the Qur'an. I'm just giving it kind of the same, applying the same sort of scrutiny to it, comedic scrutiny to it. And I thought, well, okay, I don't know. Whatever. You got it. I mean, am I not going to do it because I'd be scared? Yeah, I faced that. Sure, I did. And I just thought, nah, man, I don't want to be that guy.
Well, I'm glad you did. I mean, like you say, it's very clear that you're not singling out any particular religion. You basically take all of them apart, which is in the same manner, which is great. I mean, but the thing about religious texts is they're not all the same, as you highlight in your book as well. And I find the Qur'an particularly difficult to get my claws into, in terms of reading a book. It's a lot shorter, which is probably one of its saving graces. But I was wondering, being particularly close to it lately, is there anything about you find perfectly striking about it, or things that stand out?
Well, it's hard because it's not a narrative.
Yeah.
The others are all narratives, and there is a very, very little narrative to the Qur'an. It's a lot of admonishments. It's a lot of scolding. It's a lot of basically behave or suffer. There's a tremendous amount of submit or suffer again and again and again. There's a remarkable level of threatening that goes on in the Qur'an. It's not as engaging a read as the Old Testament, let's say, which is really lively and colorful and filled with good characters and actually has some pretty good writing in it, because Solomon, in my opinion, is a damn good writer. So there's that, and the New Testament is like a really good novella. It mainly covers the last year of Jesus's life, told by 4 different narrators, and it's a pretty compelling story. The Qur'an does not have that. The only narrative parts are hilariously, and I do find this hilarious. I find Muhammad's audacity and ballsiness really, really kind of funny. That he just pulls out the old stories and he retells them. It's like, no. That's not what happened. Let me tell you what really happened. So he tells the story of Adam and Eve in his own way, and he tells the story of Job in his own way, and his telling of the story of Jesus is particularly strange and convoluted and ridiculous, because Jesus is just a normal. I mean, the whole point of the Qur'an, in a way, is Jesus is he's just a man. He wasn't God's son. That's laughable But as a newborn baby, Jesus makes a big speech where he prophesies his own death, which is pretty strange for a newborn baby for just a normal newborn baby to do. Anyway, we get some narrative in when Muhammad retells the old stories, which somebody that I was talking to described as fan fiction, which I thought was pretty funny, that the Qur'an is basically fan fiction. And then we get a bit of new information. We get narrative when Muhammad talks about paradise, because there is so much threatening in the book that, in my view, at a certain point, he kind of realizes, like, there's a lot of stick here. I need more carrot. So the carrot is paradise, and the description of paradise is hilariously, ridiculously lame, because heaven-type places are always hilariously lame, because they always seem to end up, they're so banal. It's just like paradise is you lounge around on couches in a silk robe, wearing a lot of jewelry and drinking non-alcoholic wine and saying nice things to the other men there, because there's no reason to think there's any women there. Of course, the big news in paradise is the virgins, obviously. That's the really big important thing. I mean, really what paradise amounts to is you can have sex with virgins eternally. And so there's some narrative in that. But the other thing, here's what I think. There's a kind of a detective work involved in these books, I find, because the writers of them are trying very, very hard to hide their own fingerprints. They're trying very, very hard to affect this kind of lofty style and pose where they're not present. The pose is, this has nothing to do with me. My ego has nothing to do with this. This is not about me. They work really hard to do that. Muhammad does that. Joseph Smith does that. That's kind of the move. This is not about me. But of course, it's all about them, and it's all about their ego, and it's all about listening to them and submitting to them. Essentially, it's a gigantic power move. And when you look at it that way, and you start to see him. It become the self-serving quality of it gets very overt, and I find that pretty funny too.
Talking of funny, I was very pleased to see you include the Book of Mormon, but part of me felt that the Book of Mormon pretty much is the Chris Matheson version already. So, I mean, how did you go about adapting that to make it more ridiculous? I bet that was I would imagine that's the most challenging one.
Yeah, it's hard to mock something that bad in a way. I don't know if have you read it, Stephen?
I have, and it was a while ago, but I mean, you struck a chord with you saying then about having to do detective work, about writers trying to mask the idea that their fingerprints are all over this, and there's nothing more worse than Joseph Smith's attempt at a sort of Shakespearean King James type language. Oh, it's hilarious. Yeah, it is a hilariously bad book. He's an atrocious writer. I mean, he's got zero ability. I would say, I don't know. People say the Qur'an is really, really beautiful. The language is beautiful. I don't really know. It didn't strike me that way. There's very few things in any of these books that strike me that way. I guess I kind of get it. There are passages about nature that are kind of beautiful, and it's got an elegant spareness to it. So I guess that would be to say he can write a little bit. Joseph Smith cannot write. He is just the worst. But he makes up for it with this monumental ambition and audacity. He writes a whole new. I mean, the Book of Mormon is a narrative. He creates an entire additional
story. It's a whole new story. Now, sometimes he runs out of gas and he runs back to the Bible because he just can't think of anything, and he'll just swap in Isaiah for 10 chapters or something. Well, almost like he's catching his breath, like, okay, gotta make up more bullshit. Yeah, stalling. Yeah, right, exactly. He's just kind of vamping for a minute, and then he gets going again. He creates this incredibly elaborate, while simultaneously really blunt and crude story, but it covers 1,000 years, and it's these tribes battling each other, and he does a few interesting things. He brings in a bunch of antichrists, and that's really kind of fascinating, because it's almost like he's questioning himself, interrogating himself, attacking himself. I've never seen anything. There are things in the Old Testament that are very surprising, and you think to yourself, what is that doing in the book? That's weird. It doesn't really seem to belong in here. But Smith creates characters. He writes characters who attack his book, his story. And that's pretty interesting and pretty strange, I find. He's mainly just doing a lot of self-serving stuff, where I think he literally has Jesus prophesy him, which is, oh, man, he certainly has God prophesy. I mean, God prophesies Smith again and again. And I don't know, can you be any more can you be ballsier than that, than to have the Creator, than have God and Jesus prophesy you? It's pretty jaw-dropping stuff.
What's fascinating to me about that particular religion, I suppose, this is what it has in common with Scientology, is that the founder of that religion founded the religion in the pure light of traceable historical record. These people have public records. We know who they are. We know Joseph Smith was a fraudster. So given that, I mean, you can understand it a little bit. People have got very vague notions about what Jesus did or didn't say, and it's so long ago. We seem so far removed from it to really verify anything with any certainty. But how is the Mormon religion increasing in somewhere like America when we can explain that this man was a fraudster just chanting it for a few extra wives, essentially, from as far as I can tell?
It's an excellent question, my friend. I think the answer to it is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The books don't matter. It's not about the book. It really is. It's the atheists who read these books seriously. They don't read their own books seriously. It's not about the book. It's about the community. It's about the lifestyle. It's about the feeling of being comforted regarding what's going to happen after you die. It's about a feeling of there is some justice and in the universe, and bad people will be punished and good people will be rewarded, and you'll see grandma again even after you go to heaven, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Comforting and calming and soothing, and you're loved by you have a personal relationship with the creator of the universe who loves you. That's powerful stuff. That's powerful medicine. And for people like us who just look at it and don't buy it, it's just like, you've got to be kidding. I mean, I guess I can see how that would feel good I guess. I'm not honestly sure that it would feel good to me, but in a intellectual way, I can see how that could be comforting. But if you don't buy it, you just think it's a big shit. It's like, well, this is ludicrous. I think the books are just they're almost like props in a way. I don't think it's really about the books. But then again, it is about the books. And what I was trying to do here is make them defend their books. The books are still they can't escape them. They are very central to their belief systems, and I want to hang them around their neck a little bit. You've got to defend these things. They are filled with horrible, ugly things. But I think Mormons, just like Christians, and I presume just like Muslims, They just cherry pick. They pick a few things they like. It's like, oh, that's pretty. Oh, that's nice. Oh, I like that. Oh, yeah, that's wonderful. Oh, that's fantastic. And by the way, Joseph Smith comes up with perhaps of all of these books, he comes up with the giant money shot scene, the scene that all believers hunger for. He lets Jesus come back. He lets Jesus get revenge. He lets Jesus basically bomb cities, kill people, destroy whole swaths of countryside, and that's there's something so strange, I think, to believers and frustrating and about God being killed, being brutally killed. And so there's this hunger and Mel Gibson kind of thing. We want to see him fly down out of the sky and kick ass. And Joseph Smith delivers. He delivers that scene. And I think that scene is a very, very essential part of the appeal of Mormonism.
Yeah, that it's definitely got the most Hollywood potential, you would have thought.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was fascinating and spot on what you were just saying about religion filling this sense of community. And I think I was reading Yuval Noah Harari's book Sapiens some time ago, and he makes the great point that one of our most important human inventions is ideology, concept. We can sort of all get around an idea. It can unite us. So someone on the East Coast and someone on the West Coast who have nothing in common can unite around Catholicism or nationalism, for better or for worse. And as the tide of sort of secular atheism keeps, picking up steam, I think I'm mixing metaphors then, but you know what I mean. What fills this void? Because it just seemed like the people who are probably talking more sense on this are not politically engaged, or they don't have enough in common to form alliances or unite. So I mean, does everyone just become a secular atheist, or do we leave a big gap for something more sinister to fall in the hole? What's your take on that?
It's an excellent question. What happens next? I mean, what if we succeeded?
Yeah.
Right? What if we won? What if our side won? And what if somehow, magically, next week, we could just shake all these big ideas loose, and they could just fall away quickly, like in a year. They're all gone. It's just gone. And everybody, like emerging from a dream, and humans think, oh, that was all made up. That was all made up. What then? Is that a better world? Well, we don't know. We don't know. On the basis of the evidence of the 20th century, it's not always pretty. When you just strip religion away, it doesn't automatically lead to a better place. I mean, the Soviet Union kind of got mainly ripped away, and I guess you could say, well, they turned Lenin into a godlike figure or something, I guess is sort of the argument, and maybe that's true.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's unknown. The idea that we could think, no, we're doing you a favor here, and we're trying to remove these delusions, and then you're going to be happier. Well, it's not obvious. I studied theater in college. I was actually a theater major, and there are some really, really great and very profound plays that deal with this exact subject. The Iceman Cometh by Eugene O'Neill, and it's an Ibsen play. I think it's Wild Duck. Anyway, a character, the main character, shows up in a world of other characters who are deluded, let's say, deluding themselves, lying to themselves, and the character rather violently yanks away those lies, ostensibly to help, ostensibly to make everybody see reality and live in reality, and you'll be happier. But of course, what it does is tremendously destructive, and the other characters just collapse, and some of them even, I think, die. And the main character who wanted to do it is revealed as a fraud anyway, who's completely self-interested. So who knows? To think of ourselves as like, oh, we're the great white hats, that's bullshit. It's bull. I don't buy that. I don't buy that for a second. The way I look at it, they're just they're bullies, and bullies have to be stood up to. And what happens after if you ever take a bully down, is that the end of the story? No. Could you become a bully yourself at that point? Yeah, probably. Or as another bully? I don't know. Hell, I don't know.
See, that's the problem, Chris. I need self-righteous certainty, otherwise we're going to lose this battle.
Yeah, but the enemy is self-righteousness.
Yeah, sure.
It's their self-righteousness, so we can't really be that way.
Yeah,
I think, or it's not. I don't. It doesn't seem like a good idea.
I agree. Well, we touched briefly on the dangers of getting too, shall we say, close to the Qur'an in terms of mocking it and satirizing it and things like that. And you have a problem with Scientology in the fact that they're one of the most litigious bodies on the planet, as far as I can see. So, I mean, what sort of precaution did you take when approaching that? Was you worried at all?
None. Absolutely none. I just thought, it's a book. It's written in the early 50s. I think it's public domain. It shows you just how careful I was, Stephen. I think it was public domain. I don't know. I'm pretty sure it is. What? It's illegal to make fun of it? It's illegal to mock it? I don't think it is. I think it's absolutely legal and furthermore, it's necessary. It is our job, definitely, to poke at that stuff and make fun of that stuff. I mean, my understanding is that there's a lot of Scientologists in Hollywood. I know there are some very famous ones. I've never actually, to my knowledge, bumped into one. As a writer, I haven't really spent all that much time on the sets. So I don't really know, and I'm not really. I don't know what would happen. He made fun of Dianetics. Let's not produce his film. I mean, that seems kind of. I didn't really worry about that too much, and also Dianetics is just wonderfully insane. It's wonderfully strange and warped, and L. Ron Hubbard is such a great stand-in for God in a way. In fact, if I was gonna pick one human being from the 20th century and say, this guy is a pretty good human analogy for God, I would say L. Ron Hubbard is pretty close, because his mix of pomposity and vanity and foolishness and then underneath being tremendously warped and messed up, specifically sexually. Yeah, that's God. I mean, in my book, that's God.
Yeah, I think the difference is, I think with you going, solely for the scriptures, I don't think there's an awful lot they can do there. But a few polemics against church leaders and the behaviour of the church was actually banned in the UK, of all places, for a long time. I think Lawrence Wright's book Going Clear, that was banned in the UK under UK libel laws. And so was the film, so was the documentary, the Alex Gibney documentary.
No.
The HBO documentary.
No, is that right?
Yeah, there was some legal battle with one of the UK broadcasters for the longest time for them to be able to get permission to show it. They did eventually, but there was quite a lot of legal wrangling to make it happen. So,
wow.
Yeah, they're very, very litigious.
Wow. Well, so I'm just being so carefree. Yeah. And next week, there'll be some massive lawsuit placed against me for making fun of the super genius L. Ron Hubbard, who, these people, they're so pompous, they're so overblown, they're so self-important, they turn themselves into these giant, do you know what Macy's Day balloons are?
Yes,
you know what I mean
Macy's
when
Day
I say
Parade.
that? Yeah, the Macy's Day Parade. They turned themselves into these Macy's Day Parade balloons, these huge overinflated thing. And really, it's just apply a pinprick and watch them fly around and make that funny noise that a balloon makes when it's flying around.
I don't get the nautical aesthetic. I'm still confused by that. But we touched briefly on Hollywood before, and this has come up every time we've spoke, and everyone's getting excited for the possibility of a new Billings Head movie, and you're co-writer on those films.
Yeah.
And it seems, Keanu's made positive noises about it, and I believe there was a reunion a couple of weeks ago, and it looks like this is actually happening now. Is this the case? I
would say with 90 to 95% certainty, yes.
And that's an exceptionally high threshold for a motion picture, isn't it? I'm surprised any of them get made ever.
Sometimes it seems like it just requires a bunch of stars being in alignment for it to happen. Yeah, it's tricky. They're very expensive to make, and so the bar is pretty high, and it can be difficult, and it can take time. I think it is going to happen. I think it's looking good. Yeah. So
do you have a script? Is a script in place?
Yeah, we 10. Yeah, wow, it's been almost 10 years. That's wild. 10 years ago, Ed Solomon and I, who he's my co-creator of Bill and Ted, we got together with Alex and Keanu for dinner, and we just kind of brainstormed, and we said, well, would we ever want to do this? Would we? I mean, it's implicit within it, of course, that Ed and I did want to do it, and we were seeing whether Alex and Keanu would want to do it. Do you guys want to do it? Is there any version of this you would want to do? And we threw ideas around, and it took us a couple of years. Ed and I were trying different things, and we came up with a version of the story that the guys liked and were excited by. So Ed and I, we wrote it, and it was a very weird thing to do because we didn't own it. MGM owned it.
Right.
So it was, from a business standpoint, a kind of maybe sort of a foolish thing to do, that we were writing a movie on spec that we didn't own, that we didn't control. They could do whatever they wanted with, essentially. But we just wanted to do it because we loved the characters. So we wrote our first draft of it back in 2010, and then we did a big set of changes for Alex and Keanu in 2011. And then we just tried, and we set it up with a studio in 2016, and we did some rewrites there, but that didn't float. So now we're with another studio. So we've had a script for years and years, actually, and we're pretty close. I think these people really do want to make it, and I think he's had a kind of quite a big change in his career momentum, I think, because of John Wick.
Yeah.
And I think that's always very helpful. Movie stars matter. They matter a lot. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you can't really give anything away about the script. So if you could just tell us what happens at the beginning, the end, and that part in the middle, that'd be great.
just that. This is the guys are 50. They're actually 50, and the premise is it just hasn't worked out. They were told that they were going to write the song that was going to save the world, and now they're 50 years old, and it hasn't happened, and it's really weighing on them. And they're still kicking around. They're still trying to do it, but it's very difficult, and it's affected their marriages, and it's affected their relationships with their kids. And they're kind of tired and about ready to throw in the towel when a visitor from the future says, you got to do it right now. We need that song right now, like in 2 hours. Or if you don't, not only the whole world, but like the entire universe is going to come off its axis and fall apart. All reality is going to collapse. So they scramble, and they think, well, we know the song exists. We know the song exists. So why don't we just time travel into the future where we know we wrote it and just take it from ourselves and then we'll get it that way. So they make a series of journeys further into a number of trips further into their own future, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, trying to find the song. But every single time it just kind of goes very, very badly. It goes very badly. And then in the end, there's kind of there's a very happy ending and a little bit of a surprise in the end.
Wonderful. I love a good time travel caper. So I've got everything crossed for you that comes together.
Thanks.
I suppose lastly, I'll just ask you, you're someone who I envy in a huge amount of ways, because you've managed to somehow avoid having a social media presence. And I was just wondering if you've managed to keep that up.
Yeah, I don't do that for a variety of reasons. I think I don't want to expose myself to whatever the hatred and acrimony and which I know would come my way, because I'd get a lot of you're gonna burn in hell forever, sinner, that kind of thing. I'm just not really totally into starting my day by opening my Twitter account and having people inform me that I'm going to roast for all eternity. So it just doesn't seem like the most wonderful way to start a day. And then I know myself, and I'm just, I don't know, I'm vain and trivial, and I would get caught up in it, and I would care way too much what people thought of me, and I would get in little battles where I would be feuding with. It would just it would suck up a lot of my time and energy, because my character is not good, and so I just don't do it, because it's like, well, I can't do that drug, because if I do that drug, it'll be really bad for me.
Yeah, man, I'm in too deep. You stay pure. All the best for you on that. All right, Chris. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's always great catching up with you, and I absolutely love the book. It's hilarious, and I shall be making sure I recommend it to everyone I speak to. Is there anything else at all you'd like to get across to my listeners before I let you get back to your day? I
think we're good. Thank you, Stephen.
Wonderful. Cheers, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
No worries.
You too, man.
Thank you for listening to the Godless Spellchecker podcast. The podcast is a one-man operation, produced in my spare time away from my day job, and I love making it for you. If you enjoy what you hear, please consider lending some support. The show is entirely listener-supported. I don't sell anything, I don't run ads, and given the alternative and unpopular focus of my content, it's very unlikely to find a sponsor. So there are a number of ways you can support and chip in and help improve the show and give me more time to produce more content. You can become a patron supporter and pledge a monetary amount per month or per episode by visiting patreon.com/gspellchecker. If you can't lend monetary support right now, don't worry, there's other ways you can help the podcast too. You can share it on your various social media networks, or take a moment to leave a review wherever you listen to it. Your support is massively appreciated. Thank you. Think we've all learned something here today?